Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Excellence Through Quality Improvement Project, E-QIP's Unlock the Power of Data. We have our title today is called Turning Data into Action, Driving Equity Through Decision-Making, Collaboration, and Improvement. And we are very excited to have you join us today. And we would like to begin today's session with a land acknowledgement delivered by Sajin Jacob.
Thank you very much, Laura. Good morning, everyone. We gather virtually today from many parts of what's now called Ontario. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining this virtual presentation from Mississauga, which is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In particular, let us acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Neutral, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples. The land that is home to the Métis and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land, and by doing so, give our respect to its first inhabitants. Spending time in nature has always been an important part of my life, whether that's through scenic drives, outdoor adventures, or simply taking a quiet moment to appreciate the world around me. And so, as I acknowledge the traditional stewards of this land, I'm reminded that my ability to really enjoy these spaces exist because of the Indigenous peoples who have cared for and respected this land for generations. Indigenous communities hold a very deep spiritual, cultural, and historical connections to this land. Connections that have been passed down through storytelling, ceremonies, and stewardship. Their relationship with this land is not just about the geography, but about responsibility and sustainability. Learning about these perspectives has really helped me reflect on my own relationship with this land and the ways in which I can be more intentional in respecting and protecting it. This acknowledgement serves as a reminder that the land is not just something we live on, but is something that we should be a part of. It invites us to rethink our relationship with the environment, not as something to be owned or used, but as something to be cared for. Whether that's being mindful of how we interact with the nature, supporting Indigenous-led conservation efforts, or even taking the time to learn about the histories of the lands we occupy. And so we all have a role in honoring and upholding the Indigenous stewardship. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sajam. We are very thankful to have you here today. And as we move through this next few slides, we just wanted to give you some kind of a reminder of this session and the history of these webinars as well. So I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Laura Daly-Trottier. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a QI and data coach for the Excellence Through Quality Improvement Project. And I have the distinct pleasure of facilitating these data literacy conversations over the past 3 years. And to date, we have delivered 11 webinars and 3 workshops. And all of those were aimed at supporting the sector to understand how to use their data in planning and the delivery of mental health and addiction services. And our mission really is to make data the realm of everyone and to turn data into the beginning of conversations around how we can improve care for those we are serving. And before we get into the presentation today, because this is our last session in this series, we wanted to get some feedback from all of you. And some of you may be attending for the first time this series, and thank you for joining us. And there may be others who have attended all webinars and workshops. And we wanted to hear from you about your experience and what you might like to hear more about. So even if this is your very first webinar, this is an opportunity for you to tell us what you would like to do in terms of next in your learning. And this series was brought to you, sorry, by feedback you've given us over the years. And as we've reached the conclusion, we wanted to put together something that would give us some feedback about what you would like next. And so in order to keep that going, we have put together a little survey that will give you the opportunity to tell us how you would like us to shape future webinars, address emerging needs, and help us to understand what learning opportunities there might be for you. It's quick and easy. It takes 3 to 5 minutes complete, likely less actually. And these are the parts that we've actually included in the survey, which is providing you an opportunity to reflect on the topics that have been presented. So for those of you that attended before, give us your thoughts on what resonated with you. Thinking about new topics that you'd like us to explore, feedback on the format, how you prefer to learn. We want to hear from you about what we have done, which has been helpful, and what you think we should do differently in the future. We have a blue sky question in there, which is, looking at what your ideal QI and data webinar training might look like. Tell us what it would be, how it could be designed. And then thinking about opportunities where E-QIP can engage with your organization and support further. And so we have a QR code on the screen. We're going to play some hot tracks in the background where you will be able to listen to some music while you provide your feedback. I am also going to have Madeline launch a poll where you can complete it. And you also have the option of completing it in the chat as well. So I will just copy paste the survey link in the chat. So if you're having trouble with the poll and you prefer to use SurveyMonkey, we'll invite you to do so there. And then once we're finished with this survey, then we'll move along into the presentation for today. we just have 1 minute left and then we'll get started with our session. Okay. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the participation in the poll. We could see was quite a good uptake on that. We are going to review those results, and then we will send out to all of you kind of where we're thinking we might land. So again, thank you for your feedback. If you have anything else that you'd like to share with us, please do reach out to us. Okay, so now we are going to kind of ground us in the where we've been on our journey so far. And this slide just demonstrates the the journey of this data literacy series. And we have this lovely little rocket taking off because we're wanting to depict the power of data in that little animation. And the first webinar that we put on was Data 101, and that was an introduction to data literacy. And then we moved along to data of webinar number 2, the data journey continues. And then as we moved along, you may have attended webinar number 3, which was Unleashing Data Brilliance, Mastering Quality, Utility, and Insights. And then webinar number 4, which was Unlocking Data Insights and Unveiling Key Performance Metrics. Webinar number 5, which was Building Data Culture and Data Literacy Through Dialogue. And then these last 2 webinars, webinar number 6, which was Collecting and Using Data to Drive Equity Plans, and webinar number 7, which is today, Turning Data into Action and Driving Equity Through Decision-Making, Collaboration, and Improvement, are the last 2 in the series, a part 1 and a part 2, with a foundation in learning around using data for equity. And the key takeaways for all of these webinars is that in a world flooded with information, data literacy helps us to navigate, interpret, and provides insight into our services. And we've landed at our last in the series. And without further ado, I'm going to move us along to the next slide, which is a slide that just shows our 2 presenters, which we're so happy to have join us today. We have the pleasure of having Shireen join us once again to deliver part 2. And Shireen is her immigrant settler, is the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Manager at Services and Housing in the province SHIP. She has worked with SHIP for over 17 years in many areas of the organization, but as the EDI manager since May of 2022. Shireen is a social worker who has spent her career working with diverse populations within the mental health, addictions, and supporting housing field. And Shireen is a community leader and staunch advocate for enhanced access and services within the community that meet the needs of the people whom she serves. And Shireen is joined today by Sajan Jacob, he, him, his, who graduated from Toronto Metropolitan University with a Bachelor's of Commerce in Business Technology Management. His journey at SHIP began as a student intern, followed by a contract role within their information systems department, and eventually led to a full-time position. He's been working with SHIP for over 7 years and currently serves as a data management analyst in the quality and privacy department. And one of his primary responsibilities is developing dashboards to visualize and interpret data, helping to drive informed decision making. He holds a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt certification and has received internal auditing training. Outside of work, as Sajjan mentioned in his land acknowledgement, enjoys scenic drives and has a passion for outdoor adventures. So I will now hand the session over to Shireen and Sajjan.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you everyone for having us back today. We're really looking forward to this part two. And to begin with, I really just wanted to kind of ground us again in our learning objectives. We want to learn how organizations can use equity-related data to make informed decisions and to drive positive change. We want to look at some strategies for using data to guide team discussions and align on equity-focused priorities. How we want to understand how to present data to secure funding and resources for equity initiatives. And then we want to explore how data informs and enhances quality improvement efforts for equitable outcomes. For those that may not have been able to join us for part one, I thought I would give us a little bit of a reminder of what I went over in part one of this data equity part of the data literacy series. So in part one, I talked a little bit about that journey from inequality to justice. That's what the first kind of square in this slide shows, that idea that we're all on this journey towards using our data for equitable practice. So we may start with inequality, but we move towards equity as we build in principles of equity based on the data that we collect about clients and about staff in our organizations. But ultimately, the ultimate goal is to get to that third picture, that fourth picture in that diagram where we fix the tree. And for those of you that were there, I used that analogy on purpose. Our ultimate goal is justice. And that means that there's reconciliation involved. And that means we fix the systems that are oppressive in which we operate and that operate on the clients and the people that we serve. I talked a little bit about scientific racism and why there is potentially for many of the clients and the people that you serve a mistrust of our organizations and the way in which we collect data and use data that they provide to us based on the principles of colonization and that idea of the seventh generation principle and intergenerational trauma that impacts the people that we are asking questions of, that we are talking about and gathering information from. So we talked a little bit about that because it's important to remember and recognize that folks that we are serving and that we are providing service to have their histories, and their histories are many times histories of oppression. And so we have to always keep that in mind when we're planning how we are going to collect information, get to know them better, and then how we're going to use their information in our service delivery. And then I talked about how we at SHIP collect and apply inclusive data. Some of our practices that we've developed, some of our training that we provide to staff, some of the conversations that we have at SHIP around not just asking questions in data collection, but making offers to clients and those that we serve so that they can provide us information that they feel comfortable with, but also that we're opening up space for them to give us information with the knowledge that we're going to use it responsibly and that we recognize the impact of this, especially the social determinants of health on each of those individuals that we serve. And then finally, we looked a little bit at our dashboards, which Sajjan will go over a little bit more. He is the expert on our dashboards. He built them at SHIP. So it's wonderful to have him here to talk with you all a little bit later about how we use our multiple different dashboards in order to provide a data equity culture within the organization. But the one that I went over in part one is really our main dashboard of those MHA PDS, so the mental health and addictions provincial data set information that we collect at SHIP, and how we use our dashboards to streamline that information and for us to be able to see and use that information about our clients effectively. So that's a little recap, very brief, of part one. And if you were in part one, you know that I love polls and I love interaction. So that's how we're going to start today. Because we're talking about using data for decision making and prioritization, I'd love to know what tools you're currently using in your organizations for decision making and prioritization. And you can check all that apply. I've included some examples of the ones that we use at SHIP that we'll talk about today. And if you check if you're using other tools, if you might want to put in the chat what those other tools may be so that we can share with each other as well the other tools that people are using to help in decision making. I'll just give it a minute. And I promise I'll go over some of these with you. We have here impact assessment, an equity assessment tool, a SWOT analysis, a prioritization matrix, a community needs assessment. We are not using any tools. You may be doing other things, not necessarily grounded in tools per se, but still using ways in which your data informs decision making. And then if there are other tools that you're using, we'd be very interested to see what those tools might be. Oh, I see in the chat, OPOC. We use the OPOC as well. That's wonderful. And the OPOC is a standardized tool in mental health and addiction services that we have to kind of use, but it's also in healthcare. It's used in the hospital systems as well to collect information about service quality from patients or clients themselves. Awesome. So we have here, the majority of us are using a SWOT analysis. And so we certainly know what a SWOT analysis is, but I'll go over a little bit about our SWOT analysis at SHIP and how we use it. And then some folks are using a community needs assessment. And then we see prioritization matrix. And I have a bit of an exercise around the way in which we can use a prioritization matrix at SHIP. And then we see some others that are close behind. So from that poll, we see that people are using tools. We're using our data through tools to be able to inform decision making and to be able to make decisions that are based in equity principles for the most part. That's what we do at SHIP. So our data is only as good as we make it. Our data is powerful. And if you remember from my part one, I talked about how data is powerful, and with great power comes great responsibility, hearkening back to Spider-Man, but it's really true. It's very, very true. And so oftentimes we may have a wonderful process that's equitable for collecting data, for collecting information from folks. But once we get that data, many of us are challenged with how do we use this data responsibly to make decisions, to do service delivery, quality improvement measures, and how do we use our data to prioritize what the data is telling us. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit, how we are doing that at SHIP and being very, very mindful of how our data informs our decision making. So the first thing that I'll go over with you is an impact assessment. So there are many types of impact assessments. The important part of this particular assessment for us at SHIP is the word impact. What we're measuring and what we're looking at is the impact of our services or the impact on a particular group of people that is identified within our data as requiring further investigation on our part about the quality of our services or how we're delivering our services to a particular group of people. Or we can also look at it the other way, how we're not reaching a particular group of people. So we're not having the desired impact that we potentially would want to have on a particular group. So our data may tell us when we collect socio-demographic data and look at the social determinants of health, our data may tell us that we're missing particular people, that we're missing particular communities as far as access is concerned, as far as service delivery is concerned, as far as quality programming is concerned. And therefore, we might want to look at doing an impact assessment on that particular group because we're missing them. So impact assessments are tools to measure impact of your program or policy on that group. Referring to your data set, you scope the group and the social determinants for improvement measures. You want to determine both positive and negative impacts that you're having. It's important to look at both because the positive impacts are the ones that you want to continue to do and build on. And you have to be mindful of that, that if you're doing something very well that's having an impact on people that are in your service, you want to continue to invest in doing that very well and continuing to improve it however you can. But just as important, it is important to look at the potential negative impacts that your programs and services are having on particular communities. Many times we kind of know this, we kind of have ad hoc information, or let's say we do an OPOC, and one of the questions on the OPOC is around satisfaction with services and were your needs met, were your cultural needs met, things like that. The OPOC asks questions like that of clients. And so you might want to take a look at your OPOC data if you're collecting or if you're doing a satisfaction survey, and that may lead to you then thinking about doing an impact assessment because you identify through an OPOC or a satisfaction survey that there is potentially a negative impact that you're having. One of the tools that we use at SHIP, because we are a healthcare provider, we are a mental health and addictions supportive housing service provider. One of the ways in which we use impact assessment is through a health equity impact assessment. So that's a very standardized tool. It was developed through a standardized process. And so we use our HIA, our health equity impact assessment, to identify unintentional negative and positive impacts. The HIA on purpose makes you look at unintentional. So not necessarily the things that your program was intended to do, but the things that are happening potentially without you intending them to happen. Those are the things that we want to have and facilitate change upon, because those are the things that we're not necessarily collecting information about or being mindful of. So the HIA as an impact assessment tool leads us in that direction. It guides us that way. One of the areas of the HIA is to look at unintentional impacts. So you're looking at that unintended negative impact, and what you can identify through unintended impacts are things that you might not, or the people, your staff, the people that are running these programs might not be asking questions about. The HIA makes you ask questions about it. It provides you an opportunity to assess particular areas of your program, your policy, or even if you're running a group, you can do a HIA on a group to identify unintended impacts that may be happening. And then one of the things that the HIA and most impact assessment tools does is it then leads you to determine mitigation strategies to speak to those impacts. The final stage of the HIA as a tool is the evaluation piece. The HIA has built into it the opportunity for you to work with teams to develop an evaluation process on whatever the strategies that you are implementing are. So this is one of the tools that we use at SHIP. We have every program at SHIP has a HIA completed. We have health equity impact assessment facilitators that work with each team to develop their HIA. It has to come from the team. I can't just sit down as the EDI manager and do a HIA on a particular program when I don't know all of the ins and outs of that program, as well as all of the interactions and things that interplay for those clients within that program. So what we do at SHIP is we do the HIA with every program, and that program then goes through these stages of the HIA. There are 5 stages and steps for the HIA. I go through every step with that team, and they inform the assessment. They talk about impact. And together, the facilitator, so it's usually myself involved, we build a strategy, a mitigation strategy with steps for that team that is based on that team's experience with their clients. And we build from that mitigation strategy, we build a health equity action plan for each team. At the end of, and we have like 30 different teams at SHIP. So all 30 of those teams have a HIA within the organization. We usually collect information and evaluate and run a strategy for a year. If there's more time needed, we do quarterly check-ins with each team so we can know what progress looks like and whether we need to pivot on our strategy. And then from that action plan, what we're able to do is build out steps that the team will take in order to have the intended impact that they've identified. We evaluate these action plans, like I said, on a quarterly basis. At the end of every year of our HIA action plan, we then look at progress and what progress has looked like and what the overall impact is of that plan on the people that we serve on each team. Every HIA at SHIP also then speaks to the overall SHIP Health Equity Action Plan. So we have a health equity plan for the whole organization that is based on the themes from all 30 HIAs that we do, the like and common themes that are identified across the organizational programs. Those are the themes that we then put on the whole organization global health equity impact plan. And so we at SHIP there are 4 distinct actions within our health equity plan. Many of those actions we've seen at least in 50% of our team HIAs. So that's how they get put onto the organizational plan. So this is one way for us as an organization to not just be able to impact change within each program based on their unique identified needs that were identified through this assessment, but then have that idea of a global organizational impact, because all of those programs are how SHIP operates. They are who SHIP is. And so as an organization, we're able to look at overall impact and ensure that we are having the intended impact that we want to as an organization, or that we've identified through our data as an organization. So that is just one example of how we've been able to use a equity-based tool to assess ourselves, our programs, and then have action plans that are grounded in that information and evaluate those action plans for impact. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. I don't know if Laura has put that yet, but please put them in the chat. Hopefully we'll have some time. I'm doing my very best to stay on track today, so we have some time for discussion.
Yes, I did place it in the chat, Shireen. So folks,
Awesome.
If you could just place your questions in the Q&A function versus the chat, that will really help us as
great.
Facilitators. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next one that I wanted to talk a little bit about that we use at SHIP is a SWOT analysis. Probably many of you are familiar with SWOT analysis. Oftentimes we do this when we're looking at a program or we're looking at funding opportunities where they may ask for a SWOT analysis for that particular area. We do SWOT analyses in many different ways at SHIP, but what SWOT stands for is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And this is another standardized tool that you can use. It's really, the objective is awareness of our organizational themes and findings, and to identify any gaps in these findings. So we've used SWOTs in many different forms, but the one I want to talk about today is that we did a SWOT analysis with 21 programs or teams at their team meetings when we were trying to identify the next rendition of our EDI action plan. So at SHIP, we have an EDI action plan that has identified actions and activities for both staff and client services, as well as organizational progress. And so I did the SWOT with all of the majority of our teams. We combined some of our teams together or some of our programs together if they were similar programs. So we didn't necessarily need to do it with all 30, but we did it with 21 programs at team meetings. I also did a SWOT analysis with our board, and I did a SWOT analysis with our senior leadership team, as well as our leaders, our managers and supervisors who have more contact with direct service. And what we were able to see was that we had some very similar ideas across the organization about what our strengths were, what our weaknesses are, what opportunities lie ahead for us as an organization, and potential threats to the organization or to our ability as an organization to move forward with our EDI action plans and our EDI objectives and initiatives. So we took those common themes and we put them into our EDI action plan. That's how we formulated our last EDI action plan and anti-racism framework, was through doing these SWOT analysis with our entire organization so that the voice of the people most impacted is embedded in that action plan. And I think that's the other, I keep coming back to this word impact. Many of these assessments and tools that we use at SHIP are really about looking at impact. Those folks that are most impacted by your program, by your organization, by your services, by your policies, their voices need to be embedded into the creation of those decisions. And that's what we're trying to do with these tools that we use. A SWOT analysis can also be used if you are looking at making significant program changes. If you've identified, let's say you did an impact assessment, and you've identified that there's an area of need that you have within the organization where you want to improve positive impact because you're having unintended negative impacts, you can do a SWOT analysis with that particular program, where you're looking more in depth at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so you can break it down a little bit more with a SWOT analysis based on your impact assessment that you completed, and then have detailed steps and understanding of these areas. So strengths might be able to tell you that you are looking at things to improve. Those positive unintended or positive impacts that you want to improve could be identified in your strengths. And the SWOT analysis is a little bit easier of a tool for people to be able to engage with than the HIA, let's say. I will say that from having done both of them with our entire organization, people find it a little bit easier to engage in a SWOT. Sometimes it's easier to have conversations when you're looking at strengths, weaknesses, when you're talking about opportunities, than it is to identify unintended impacts. We've gotten very used to it because we do the HIA every year or two. So folks at SHIP have gotten used to being able to do it. But I still find that the SWOT is a little bit more palatable for people to be able to have these conversations that are sometimes challenging to have. When you're looking at weaknesses of your program or your organization, it can be challenging to identify those and really hone in on what's causing those weaknesses or those issues to happen within your program. So a SWOT is another tool that we use at SHIP to be able to use our data responsibly and still look at impact. Another tool that we used, and this one I kind of briefly touched on in part one, just as an example of how we built equity into our culture. This is called an equity assessment tool. And I will admit that we developed this ourselves. So this is a self-developed tool within the organization. Our EDI committee did some research looking for a way to truly live and act on when we say that we build an equity lens into our policy and decision making. We didn't know how we did that. We talked about it. Everybody talks about it. People say, you know, just use an equity lens. You build an equity lens into things. And so I took that very seriously because I couldn't identify for our EDI committee or for our leadership what that actually means. How do we build an equity lens? And how do you know that that's what you're doing? How do you evaluate yourself that you've actually built equity into decision making or into your policy development? So we looked and we did some research through our EDI committee, which is very representative of the organization and of the communities that we serve. And we couldn't find a tool that enabled us to do that, or a way in which you could kind of gauge how you're building equity into practice. So we found some resources. And so what we did is we took the resources that we found and we compiled them into something that works for us at SHIP, that we were looking for in order to answer the questions that we had as an EDI committee about what equity lens means, what building equity into practice means. So what our equity assessment tool does is it helps us to scope those most impacted by the policy, the program, or the group that you are assessing. Most often, and for all of our policies, we use this tool. For all of our policy reviews and for all of our policy development, this tool is the go-to. And the tool is not just used by one group of people or one person. It is meant, and it goes through in the tool itself, who you should be consulting with. And it always goes back to identifying those most impacted, by the policy, the program, or the group that you're trying to create or review. For those most impacted, who's already at the decision-making table and who needs to be. So the tool goes through a process, and what I've shown here is the first page of it. It starts off this way: persons impacted because of, and how those people are impacted. So if you're looking at, let's say, developing, and this is the example I can give you is when we developed our prevention of violence and harassment policy for client interventions, we started off with this. Our policy development went through many different phases, and we started off at looking at who's most impacted by the development of this policy and which groups of people are most impacted by how we develop this policy. And then we looked at, in the next couple of pieces of the tool, say, once you've identified who's most impacted, who is already at the decision-making table. So as an EDI committee, we were looking at this particular policy, and when we identified people impacted, we looked at ourselves as a committee, and are there people that are most impacted represented within this committee? Do we need to identify other people who are not represented at the committee who's assessing this policy? And so we developed a process for consulting and incorporating the voices most impacted into the development process from the beginning. The tool leads you through to, of those that are not at the table but are most impacted, who should you be consulting with? Who are you going to bring into the process from the beginning? So we use this tool from the beginning, not in the midst of and not at the end of a review or a development. It is used at the beginning of development to inform you who should be at the table for decision making from the very beginning of the process. And that's intentional. That is one way we as an EDI committee decided that how we build equity into practice is by having an equitable table from the beginning as part of the process of building the practice. And that you can only do if you're able to identify who isn't there already. And that should never be, the tool kind of identifies this for you, should never be one person making those decisions. Ultimately, at the end of the day, our CEO signs off on all of our policies, or our director of people and culture will sign off on human resources policy. But they are not the ones that should be creating them and developing them for people across the organization that are impacted differently. So that responsibility is ours as an organization to ensure that we're doing this, developing policies and programs in a manner that incorporates the people most impacted. And that's what this tool helps us to do. So I want to talk a little bit about a community needs assessment. And so this can be done in many different ways. This is another tool that assists us in being able to look at our community on a whole and make decisions based on point in time, because community needs assessments are point in time. So I just wanted to make that clear as well. When you do a community needs assessment, it's because you're looking at a particular time in the communities that you serve and what their needs are in this particular time. And we know going into a community needs assessment that that could potentially change over time. So our community needs assessment that we recently did at SHIP is for the next few years. The data is based in our current data for last fiscal year, so from 2024 to 2026 is when we know that data needs to be reviewed again in 2026. It may not change significantly, but it may have changed. And we want to build into our process the idea that we need to look at it again for those changes. It may not change our objectives from our community needs assessment, but it may have some influence on the direction that we take moving into the future. Or we may identify that we need to engage with more people in order to inform the community needs assessment a little bit more. So what a community needs assessment is an opportunity to look at your community demographic data. So we used in ours, and we hired a consultant to do this as a third party for us. Our first community needs assessment we did, I think, in 2017. And we did that internally, and we had a process. But when we went back to that community needs assessment, we identified what was wrong with it, what we were missing, what parts of our process when we did it internally did not work or did not give us the enough data, enough information. And that's where we decided that we really did need to hire consultants to do a holistic community needs assessment and be able to engage with all of the people that needed to be engaged with and inform this community needs assessment. So they looked at available statistical data, the most current data about all of the communities that SHIP serves, which is Peel Region, Dufferin County, Etobicoke, York, and Kitchener-Waterloo. So they did a holistic statistical analysis of those regions. And then they also looked at our internal data as an organization for each of those regions. Our consultants also then embarked on an engagement with partners, staff, and clients from each of those communities distinctly that we serve. And those engagement sessions were around service needs, strengths, and challenges of those particular partners in the areas that we had identified we wanted to assess. So for us as a supportive housing organization, our main area for this community needs assessment was around housing, not just supportive housing, but housing in general, with a particular sort of lens on supportive housing, of course. But that is one of the areas that we wanted to assess. And then to add on that, what particular populations and groups were most impacted by supportive housing or lack thereof. They also took a look at emerging sectoral trends, identifying current and emerging trends within the sectors that may impact service provision, and they did a comparative analysis with similar providers across different regions than ours. So we were able to have a very holistic view about not just the communities that we serve and what the needs of those communities are, with a focus on particularly housing and supportive housing, but we were also able to identify what are the trends in the sector and what are others doing as well when it comes to meeting community needs from their communities and whether or not we saw similarities. This community needs assessment identified for us, and we received a report at the end of the assessment. It identified for us that we have a particular need in particular equity deserving populations when it comes to housing in general, but also in supportive housing. And so that the report was able to break down for SHIP what those equity deserving populations are that are most in need and being missed by supportive housing services, by our access principles, by the ways in which we provide access and outreach. And we were then able to build from our community needs assessment a action plan, so and embed it into our strategic plan moving forward when it comes to providing housing and services. So that's just another way in which you can use data to inform your decision making, but also to inform your next steps. Your data tells you where you need to go when it comes to quality improvement. And potentially the data will tell you that you need to do something else, like have a bigger assessment like this community needs assessment. And really, essentially, at the core of the reason why we needed this community needs assessment is when we developed our system for our collection of MHA PDS, that's where we identified we were missing populations. Our data showed us that we needed to know our community better, and we needed to know the communities we serve and what their specific needs were and are in order to develop plans on how we're going to serve those communities the way that they need to be served. And so I always go back to how we use our data responsibly. And this is one way in which we were able to develop a plan to do this community needs assessment and now use it responsibly, moving it forward to inform our practices as an organization. Okay, time for another poll. I've been talking too much. So, how do you currently prioritize initiatives, decisions, projects, services at your organization? So the how is just as important as the tools that we use. How do we use the tools? Who uses the tools? What are you actually doing with it? So leadership prioritizes with input from staff. Leadership prioritizes and makes decisions independently. We use a process including staff and leadership to collaborate. We don't have a prioritization process. And don't worry if you don't have one. I'm going to walk you through one today and hopefully engage you a little bit in one way in which we can look at prioritization. Okay, so the majority of you have a system where leadership prioritizes with some input from staff. And then we see leadership prioritizes and make decisions independently next. Tied with, we use the process including staff and leadership to collaborate. And then 12% don't have a prioritization process, which is fantastic because that's what we'd like to be learning together today is one way in which you can look at prioritization a little bit differently. I worded this on purpose this way. The first point being leadership prioritizes with input from staff. That's intentional because most often that's what most people do. That the leadership prioritizes after and then they seek input from staff. We are trying very hard at SHIP to do it the opposite, to have a process where input from those most impacted is from the beginning, where we are not just having, leadership prioritize and then ask questions of staff and what they think, what their feedback is, but we also want to be able to include those most impacted. And I didn't include community and I didn't include clients on it on purpose as well. I wanted to see if folks would identify that themselves potentially as part of our process. We are working towards that model, working towards that. We aren't there yet either at SHIP. We have developed, I think, a process that has input from staff from the beginning. So staff are at the table when we're making decisions, but we're working on having client, family, and community impact at the table from the beginning as well. So that's our ultimate goal, but it has been challenging, as you can imagine. So let's talk about prioritization, because as we use these tools, more often than not, these tools help us identify things that we have to do, actions, and usually it's more than one. There's usually a bunch of different actions that these tools that we talked about identify for us that we need to take and that we need to be able to do in order to improve quality in our services. So what happens next when you have, 5 or 6 different things that you've identified now? Fantastic. But how do we prioritize? We don't all have unlimited resources. We don't have, usually, most of us don't have staff or resources or money and funding to be able to do all of the things that we may identify with our assessments. So prioritization becomes very important. How do you build equity into prioritization, though? That's the big question here today. Is our data may tell us something, and we've collected our data equitably. We have gone through a process to assess what our data says and looked at ourselves equitably. So we now need to look at how do we prioritize equitably. So one of the things that we are trying to use at SHIP is a prioritization matrix. It's a way to be more systematic about the decisions you make and the actions you take. It's a 2x2 decision matrix, and it was invented or coined by General Eisenhower from the United States. So it's oftentimes referred to as the Eisenhower matrix. The reason he created this was because he was faced with constant decisions throughout his military career and his career as president. His saying was, we often confuse the urgent with the important and the important with the urgent. So it's a way for us to break things down when we're prioritizing into what is most urgent and what is most important. And that's really, really hard to do, especially when you're talking about people and when you're talking about impact. When you're talking about actions that impact people, it can be very challenging to prioritize. So if this process rests entirely with your leadership team, you have one group of people that are completely challenged by this process, that oftentimes they themselves are not close enough to the work itself and to the impact itself to be able to prioritize effectively and equitably. So this Eisenhower matrix helped him to prioritize what he should focus on. He layered 2 attributes, importance and urgency, against each other. And so what we have is a matrix. And in this matrix, it looks at cruciality versus timeliness. So is something crucial or not crucial? Should we do it now or should we wait till later? And are we able to wait till later? So those are the kinds of questions that you ask yourself. And that's it. We look at crucial or not crucial, do now or do later. And so in the matrix, the 2x2, what it does when you decide these things for each action, it gives you an outcome of whether something is crucial and do now, crucial do later, not crucial do now, or not crucial do later. And so it gives you an opportunity to have a system to start looking at how do we prioritize these decisions as a group. And so the activity that I want to do with you is going to help us look at each of these quadrants and make some decisions around prioritizations. I'm going to start us off easy, and then we'll get a little bit tougher, because most often our decisions around prioritization are tough. They're hard. They're not easy. And oftentimes we get stuck because we go around and around in conversations because we don't actually want to make the decision that one group is more crucial or for us to do now than another. That's usually what ends up happening. So what I propose and what we try to do at SHIP is a little bit different. I have for you here this slide, so I won't go through it all, but it's what each quadrant means. And when you get the slides, I think Laura will send them out after this. You can take a look and recognize what each of these quadrants kind of means, an idea about what each of the quadrants mean. Okay, so I'm going to need, yeah, there we go. So I'm going to share this activity. It is on Menti. So if you want to, can you let me know when you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome. So if you all could scan the code so you can participate, and then we will go through, or you can go to menti.com and use the code up here to participate in the prioritization activity. Okay. So I see 11 or 12. Okay, the number's going up. I'll just give it a couple of seconds and then we can see what you need to do. Go. Just give it one more minute and then we'll get started on the activity. Okay, so I promised I'd start easy. So we're going to do an easy one first. So you'll see little slide bars, and that's what you're doing. One slide bar is cruciality, and one slide bar is timing. So we want to rate the quality improvement process you feel the organization should undertake in order of priority. So you've got 4 processes here. Number 1 is review your intake process. Number 2 is do a SWOT analysis. Number 3 is develop an EDI action plan. And number 4 is do a community needs assessment. So in rating each of them, you're rating each of them for whether they're crucial and do now, or not crucial and do later. So you're looking at crucial or not crucial, do now or do later. And you want to slide the bar to where you think each of them is for you as an organization. Oh, so we're getting some answers. So we can see when we look at what people are saying that right now, oh, and it keeps moving because that's the beauty of this tool and doing it with Menti. So I'll talk while you all are making your decisions. I will just talk about the reason that we use Menti. I had talked a little bit about the idea that sometimes prioritization is challenging for people, and it's hard to make these decisions. It's even harder to do it in front of people with your colleagues sometimes, especially when you're talking about things that may be really challenging for you as a person or your program in particular, or you know that you struggled with it for some time, or you also just have a hard time, thinking about what should we do with all of it can be very overwhelming. So using Menti provides an anonymity that sometimes makes a bit of a difference for people to be able to make these decisions and not feel judged and not feel that there's a bias. We all carry bias, and it's not that Menti takes away the bias, but what it does is it enables you to sit back in that bias and look at things a little bit differently because you're not being judged in a conversation. So we used this tool in our initial EDI action plan that we developed. Our EDI committee used this tool to be able to make decisions about what the priorities on that action plan should be. And that looked like what came first. Of all the 29 different actions that we knew we identified we needed to take as an organization, how do you possibly prioritize them? So we use this tool anonymously, virtually like this, for people to be able to give us their honest opinions and not have to feel like they were being judged or that they weren't in agreement with anybody else. So how could I possibly think that if nobody else agrees with me? And we were able to prioritize all 29 different activities as a result of being able to do it in this process. So it's something that has been effective for us. So let's take a look right now. Wow. So you can go on each one when you set this up in Menti, and you can look at the splay diagram as well. So you can see for you all right now, the crucial and do now is mostly review the intake process with very also develop an EDI action plan is kind of right there as well. And then you have your due community needs assessment. So this is the most crucial according to your input, just by a little bit. A community needs assessment is the most crucial right now. And it is all, they're all kind of in this do now area. So this is what you have to look at is what's most crucial for us and this group today. Doing a community needs assessment is most crucial. So, and it is also of the same timeliness, pretty much the same timeliness as all of them. So for us prioritizing today, this would be our highest priority, doing a community needs assessment. And then we could say, if this is the highest priority of these 4 different improvement processes, we want to invest our time and our energy and maybe resources into doing this. It's also the do now. So they're all kind of do now. They're all kind of, we need to do this now. But because it's the highest cruciality, we then say we're going to do this first. This is going to take our investment of time. It's going to take our investment of resources. We're going to do this first. And then when you're decision making and planning, you can say, okay, so we're going to do our community needs assessment first. That's going to take us X amount of time. And then second, we're going to look at develop an EDI action plan because that's also a more crucial than the others. Kind of same timeliness, but it's more crucial. So then we're going to say, if we're going to do the community needs assessment within this next year, and it's going to take us a year to do that and see outcomes, we might want to start planning for the EDI action plan development within the next 2 quarters. So you can make some decisions about how you prioritize, but also how you do things and when you do things, what resources you might need, what resources you might need to invest in, or what resources you might need to find funding for or go for in order to do what is a priority for you as an organization. That makes sense for folks. Okay, so that was the easy one. Now we're going to do a little bit of a harder one. So I'd like you to rate the demographic area the organization should prioritize. So we have 4 different socio-demographic areas and people here. People with disabilities is 1, racialized groups is 2, our 2 is LGBTQIA plus population, and then 4 is women identified folks. So told you it's going to be harder because it's harder to prioritize people. All people on this list are oppressed, equity deserving peoples. But from our data at SHIP, we have identified that these groups are in need of differences in our services. We need to improve our service delivery to these particular groups of people because we are missing them. Our access is not accessible for them. They are not satisfied with our services the way that we are providing them. So our data is telling us that we have to do something with all of these groups of people. But we don't have unlimited resources. We certainly don't have unlimited staff and time. So we have to prioritize based on resource allotment. How do you possibly do that? How do you prioritize people? So using this type of a tool is one way to do it without having to put people on the spot. They're all equally important. All of these groups are equally important and should be prioritized. But like I said, we have to find a way to prioritize how we act on what we need to do for each of these groups. Knowing that we can't necessarily do it all at the same time, we may be able to prioritize one or two given the resources that we have, and then look at how do we find funding to be able to speak to the needs of the other two groups. But we still need to start somewhere. So it's a little bit more challenging, but it's possible, as you've seen, because you all have done it. Here we see, and they're very close. They're very close, and they always are. When we do this, they always are. It's very, very close more often than not. And so this is where you may say, we have pretty much tied or together here is people with disabilities and racialized groups. So here's where you may say, these two socio-demographic areas are where we're going to concentrate our proposal writing, getting more funding for the next year. We're going to focus intentionally on these two groups that we've prioritized. We're going to find more funding for them and be able to increase our resources for the next year. Not that we're going to ignore the 2S LGBTQIA+, because there's still a need there, or women identified. We're not going to ignore them, but we're going to be able to focus most of our resources here where we see the greatest priority. And then at the same time, we will still do what we can to improve our service delivery to the other groups, but a priority for funding potentially is a decision that you can make is going to be in these two areas. Or we're going to prioritize partnering with other organizations who provide services specifically and have experience and expertise with this particular population. So it allows you to make some decisions in that regard. We're going to prioritize these two groups, and this is how we're going to do that. We're going to go for funding specifically. We're going to collect data specifically, or we're going to look at partnerships specifically in these two areas, if that's one way that we can improve our service delivery. Okay, thank you so much for that. I appreciate you taking the time to do that activity with me. I hope that you found it helpful. It certainly has been helpful for us at SHIP in order for us to be able to make hard decisions together. And like I said, we don't just do that with leadership. We do it more often than not. It's usually with our committees or our ERGs. So we have employee resource groups who are representative of particular groups of people. And so we will do it with all of our ERGs and see what we see. And sometimes we will also, our EDI committee has client and family membership. So they are a part of this process as well when we do it with our EDI committee. Okay, so I want Sajan to be able to have plenty of time. So I'm going to wrap it up here, I think. So let's talk about RFPs, grants, and proposals. A lot of these assessments, these tools that we use, are prioritization activities that we do, oftentimes can be used when we are going for grant money, funding proposals. And what we do is many times, and I'm sure many of you have seen this, and I don't know if this is going to change, but it certainly has changed in the last couple of years. Many grant and RFP applications now require demographic data of those you serve and intend to serve. So there are questions on many of these applications or grant applications, especially for ministry funding. They do ask you for quite a bit of information about your demographic data, about the communities that you serve, about how diverse your boards are sometimes even. So this information and these tools can help you prepare for that. Accessible and streamlined processes enable us to identify priority groups readily. Oftentimes, a lot of these RFPs, or most often it's the grants, that speak to particular groups, that are for particular groups. If you don't already have the data or know if they're a priority for your organization, it's harder to speak and go for those grants. But if you've already prioritized and you know that this is a priority population that we are trying to do improve our services for, we have our data that we've collected about this particular population and what we're doing and how they feel about our services, you're easily able to go for those grants and provide quality information and data in those grants, which is what they're asking for. Data equity processes embedded within practice equals valid, useful data and evaluation. So if you have these as common practices within your organization, in your data culture, you're able to look at RFPs, grants, and proposals very differently. You're able to write them with data built into your practice already. So you don't have to wonder whether or not your data is valid. When I do RFPs and grant proposals for SHIP, I always make it a point to identify our data equity program at SHIP and that our data is not just valid, but it's equity-based data. Whether they ask that or not, I always identify it because I think it's important for your funders to know that you have data that is about the people that you intend to serve or that you are serving currently, that they should fund you because you have been responsible and you have used your data responsibly, but also ethically and equitably. So I always make it a point to say that. Our equity plans are grounded in valid, reliable data, ensuring proposals are inclusive. And I always say that as well. And that they reflect those most impacted by services and that their voices are included. I always, always say that as well. When we do prioritization, like I said, when we do it with our EDI committee that has representation from across our organization, but also from clients and family members, you need to be able to say that this is inclusive information, that it was written not just including people's opinions and feedback, but including them. They were included in the process itself. They are included in the data itself. And I think that makes a bit of a difference for us at SHIP in being able to have, some success in receiving funding for many of our initiatives, including the community needs assessment. So I will just say that we were able to get funding for the community needs assessment to hire a consultant to do it for us because this is the approach we took when we put in the grant proposal. And that was what the outcomes that we were looking for from a community needs assessment. We included all of our data and we included the way in which we had collected our data and our data equity process at SHIP. And I think that made quite a bit of a difference to the funder in providing us that opportunity. I think I'm turning it over to Sajin. Yes, I am. Thank you all so much. And I will put you into the best hands possible to talk about the next part of our presentation.
Thank you so much, Shireen. I'll just have to say that, even though I work with Shireen, hearing all the work that she does and going through the examples with all of you, it truly is amazing to see and hear all the great work that has been done. So really appreciate what Shireen has been doing. So for my portion of this presentation, I'll be sharing with you it's going to be a mix of a show and tell almost of a couple of the dashboards that you may have already heard that we have at SHIP that really helps us with decision making and planning. And then also, hopefully this will allow you to take some key home messages of what this has helped us with. So in turn, it can help you in your organizations. So first, from our quality perspective, when we're looking at client data, the dashboard has really helped us visualize what kind of clients we're serving. And you can already imagine that with all the client data that we have to collect, especially with demographics, it's probably not that easy to just read reports that just give us textual information. And that's where dashboards really help and come into play to visualize what kind of data we're dealing with. And so looking at client information, why is that so important to visually see? Well, one of the main things is to make sure that we are seeing some of our staff, or are the staff that we have in our programs, are they compatible with our clients? And so that in turn leads to helping us determine, do we have any conflicts that we want to avoid, right? Any unintentional conflicts. So specifically, we're talking about things like historic or religious conflicts. There are those kind of conflicts that affect certain individuals, and so we want to ensure our staff being assigned to clients to properly assign clients to avoid any of those conflicts. And so you'll see how we've been able to use the dashboard, our client dashboard, to really help visualize this data clearly. And so that's where at this point, we're going to see a little demo of our client dashboard. Now, for some of you, as Shireen mentioned earlier, if you were part of the first part of this series, you would have already seen this dashboard. So for some, it may be a refresher, but for others, it will be completely new. And so hopefully you'll be able to take some helpful information from it. So at this point, I'll just ask if I could take control of the screen. Okay, perfect. And then I will bring up my screen to show you what our dashboard is. And so hopefully you guys are able to see that.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as a quick recap, what we have here on the first page of our client dashboard is essentially a visual of all of the key MHA PDS elements that you all are probably aware of. And I'm going to say here, and Shireen's already heard me say this as well in our internal meetings, is those little graphs you see here, they probably look like little watermelons. And so a little catchphrase I like to say is hopefully that makes you hungry to collect this data. And so this really just allows us to get an overview perspective of what are the aligned or unaligned areas in each of our key client demographics. And so you'll see the little red portions represent the unaligned areas. And so those are things where the clients may not have actually answered certain questions, or they haven't been collected yet. And then aligned is going to be the areas that have the correct values collected. And so currently in our agency, we're sitting at approximately an 86% alignment in all of this demographics. And so that's where, if we look at the actual client demographics page, this is where we can see in each of these key domains what percentage of clients are represented in each of these areas. Now, we do also highlight what is the unaligned rate alongside each of these domains, because that will also help us determine how confident are we in using that particular domain to help us with our decision making. So for example, if we see here, religion is currently one of the higher unaligned areas in our organization. And so we're only at about a 71% alignment in that area. And so this may not be an area that we want to use to help with decision making because it doesn't have a strong enough confidence. Whereas in other areas, we can see where there is a higher valid alignment rate in. And so we can really use this. And for those of you who do already use dashboards, you already know that dashboards are not meant to just use it as stagnated visuals. You can interact with them. And so that's where when it comes to planning, service delivery within your programs, especially determining where should our resources be allocated, for example. We can look at pre-existing conditions. What kind of conditions are our clients currently being faced with? And so we can see here, currently, uh, clients that have schizophrenia or depressive disorders seem to be the top two highest pre-existing conditions. And so if we really want to drill down and see, okay, what kind of clients are represented by this? If I click this tile, you can see the dashboard changes according to that specific filter. And so you can visually see now in each of these categories where your clients are represented. And so right now we're just looking at an overall agency picture of our organization, but each of our programs are able to filter it down as well. So if a particular program in our agency wants to see what kind of clients are represented within that program, we can use these individual program filters as well. So that was just pretty much how we've been able to use this dashboard, and just a little demo for you to see what we're able to do with this dashboard and how it can help you and your organization visually see these demographic categories. So I'll just stop sharing now, and then if we can go back to the main slides. Okay, perfect. I'll just move it forward. Oh, okay. So when we're looking at that dashboard, essentially, I already kind of touched on some of these points, but looking at program evaluation and improvement, how we've been able to use this is looking at the demographic breakdown. We can assess whether certain programs are reaching the intended populations effectively. So for example, coming back to the point that I was mentioning about avoiding any unintentional conflict, so specifically any historical or cultural conflict. So for example, if we see certain clients that are identifying, for example, with an Azerbaijani ethnicity, we probably don't want to group those clients with someone who is with an Armenian background, right? Due to ongoing conflicts within that region. So that's where visually seeing this data can help us pinpoint and evaluate how we're allocating our clients. Looking at client needs assessment, right? When we saw the pre-existing conditions, we can prioritize where our health services and resources should be allocated. With helping with strategic planning, you'll notice we had a little age group category to help determine can we anticipate any future needs for different services? So are we having certain programs that are allocating more towards youth-focused clients versus elderly clients? So we can visually see that breakdown. And then, of course, for overall performance metrics and continuous improvement, this data you can use as a baseline benchmark to track for improvements over time. So again, using things like the OPOC or the client needs assessment to really help monitor and address any of those unaligned, or otherwise known as the do not know or unknown areas that seem to have a lot of missing data. So being able to use this dashboard to see, okay, what are those areas that we need to reduce this missing data and improve our overall data quality? And so this dashboard has really helped us go from almost a very low overall completion or alignment rate to now a very high alignment rate. And so we're continuously working to get towards almost 100%. Maybe challenging, but we're getting there. So this dashboard has really helped us along that journey. And so now what we're going to get into is looking at from the staff's perspective. Now, this is an area where we currently have a challenge in collecting staff demographics. That may be a challenge in your own organizations as well. It certainly is with us, but there are things that we're doing to really improve on that. One of that is training. But what I'll be going over at this moment is how we've actually been able to help staff get more involved within their programs. So really making sure that we're aligning the proper staff to clients, and also making sure that when we're transitioning clients between agencies, how are we using this dashboard to ensure that we're effectively communicating to our partners and ensuring that all of our clients have the proper assessments and care that they were supposed to receive. And so that's where, again, I'll just ask if I can take control of the screen, as I'm going to show you a little demonstration of one of our programs dashboards. So if you can let me know when you see that.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So what we're looking at is one of our programs that ship, what their program dashboard looks like. And so what we're seeing here is it gives us an overall picture of how many contacts in terms of direct, indirect, and admin contacts our staff spending within a certain time period. And so we have a little date picker to adjust that range. And so that can help us with resource allocation. Are we spending more indirect versus direct contacts in certain areas? We're also able to see what kind of clients are we serving based on their risk code. Okay, so we use something called an ERL, or emergency response level, and it helps us see what level of risk are our clients at. And it really also helps us with caseload management. So ensuring that we're not assigning all high or medium risk clients to a particular staff, as that can eventually lead to a burnout or a heavy caseload for some individuals. But this bottom section here is where I'd really like to highlight where this has been really helpful across all of our programs in terms of scheduling, being more open across the program. So essentially what you can see here is I've sort of masked our unique identifiers. So we normally have the actual client names here, but for purpose of this presentation and privacy reasons, I've masked the unique identifiers. But essentially, our program can now visually see all of the clients that we currently have in our program, who their assigned worker is, what kind of risk code has been assigned to them to help with caseload management, and indicating whether they are actively receiving service or on a wait list. So this has really helped with our programs in seeing that distribution of clients. And then here's the really fun part, which is really helped our programs. And I'm specifically using our EPI program because they have really improved from the time we first launched this dashboard to the state now. They are one of the top performing programs, which has reached almost high completion, as you can see in some of the 100% completions in our assessments. And so this dashboard helps us track what are the upcoming or overdue assessments, key assessments that need to be completed within the program. This is highlighted here on the dashboard, and it helps each of the staff members and leadership in our programs see, okay, where are areas that we need to improve on. So you can see there's a lot of greens, and the greens essentially mean that these are clients who have their assessments completed on time. So it's telling us when the next assessment should be done. Whereas if you see any of the reds or yellows, the reds are indicating, okay, these assessments have been overdue for some of these clients. Or the yellows mean we're in the current month that these assessments are due. And so you can see how this can probably be very helpful instead of having to go manually into your client record management system, okay? And try and search for, oh, when is the next OCAN or when is the next Columbia suicide assessment that I need to do for my client? That is all visually available for us in this dashboard. And I can say that 6 months ago, these were all not green before. There were a lot of yellows and reds. And one of the key things that really helped drive this improvement as part of the change management of this dashboard is at first for some staff, this may seem a little overwhelming. This may be something where staff may see this as, is this what my manager is going to use to pinpoint me? Am I doing my work or not? Or is this going to be a micromanagement kind of tool? Absolutely not. The main intention is this is an open tool. So essentially all of the staff in the individual programs that have their program dashboard, they have access to this. And our main message towards them was that even though there are individual staff assigned to some of these clients, this is really a collaborative approach. So each staff within our programs can use this to help support other staff in that program with any of these assessments. And so this is where it has really helped easily track this and also lead to the very high completion rates in these key areas. So this is a little demo of the program dashboard that we have at CHIP and how it has really helped us with our program utilization and really helping our staff get more active and efficiently complete their work for our clients. So I'll just stop sharing, and then if we can go back to our slide. Okay, perfect. I think there's just one more piece. Okay, yes. So essentially, what you saw in our dashboard is one of the main things I mentioned earlier was the client risk codes. It helps us with risk management. We can evaluate the proportion of clients in each risk level. So we're prioritizing those high risk clients versus the low-risk clients. So we can implement more targeted interventions. And then also addressing any missing risk codes. In terms of those direct and indirect and admin contacts, it really helps with contact efficiency and service delivery. So it helps us analyze the proportion of our contacts. Are we allocating our resources properly to help with client engagement? So as you may know, most programs should be meeting an 80-20 or 60-40 proportion. So 80% should be direct or 60% should be direct, and then the remainder is the indirect piece. And so this dashboard really helps us track that utilization, and also the big part, which is timeliness and compliance. So we're able to track when our next assessments and plans are due. And also it highlights any delays or incompletions, right? And then overall quality assurance. So maintaining that 100% in key areas such as the suicide screeners or environmental screeners. And also worker and program assignments in terms of the workforce productivity. This really helps analyze the staff workloads and program assignments to really see that distribution of responsibilities. And it's also used as a performance assessment. And again, it's a collaborative team tool that we're able to use to track the timeliness of our key assessments in our program. And so this is essentially what we've been able to use with our dashboards and how it has helped us with the decision making and planning. So hopefully that was helpful and useful, that you may be able to take back to your own organizations and see how you can implement some of these tools to help with your decision making. And so I think the next slide is the end. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sajan and Shireen. Of course, they have so bravely included their contact information. So thank you for that. Please know that you're welcome to reach out directly to either of them with any thoughts or comments. We did want to take some time to reflect on the Q&A that has come in throughout the presentation. And oh, sorry, I double clicked. I was impatient for the slide to change. So for the Q&A portion, I'm just going to reflect on the Q&A that came in throughout the session. And so Shireen, at the very beginning, Sarah had typed in a question regarding, could you please share this tool? And that was related to your internally developed equity assessment tool at SHIP.
I can find out if I can share it. I'm not going to say yes and then get in trouble because I don't know how proprietary it is, to be honest, because we did develop it internally. But I will certainly find out if I'm able to share it. And if I am, I will send it to Laura to share it out with everyone.
Ah, that's great. Thank you so much. And then we have a question from Irina, who is asking, how do you prioritize based on distinctive groups while honoring that folks have multiple intersecting identities?
I love that question because that is something that I didn't show in our demonstration. But the demonstration with Menti, you create the Menti questions. So when you're doing that creation of the questions, you can include that intersectional lens in there as well, based on your data. So I just generalized because it's easier to do that with this group. But certainly when we're doing it, we always create questions based on our data. And as you saw with Sajin's demonstration, we can look at our dashboard and see intersections and then ask specific questions about that. So if we're looking at particularly, let's say, so people with disabilities, people who identify that they have a disability, we can also then see, are there more male identifying or female identifying folks that identify as a person with a disability? Or is there a particular ethnic group as well? So we can parse our data a little bit more than what I showed here and be able to then do the prioritization that way accordingly and just set up the matrix so that it reflects those intersections if that's what you're able to do, if that's what your data tells you. So certainly that's a way to incorporate that intersection piece. And certainly you're not going to hit on all intersections because I don't think that's possible to do effectively. And the data may not tell you that. So I think it's dependent on how you go back to your data set and kind of look and analyze and assess what those intersections are specifically that you are also able to speak to. And I think that's the other piece of that particular prioritization exercise is that I didn't want to put anything on there as a category if I knew as an organization we were not going to be able to speak to anything, or if it wasn't identified in our data. So if our data didn't identify women as being an underserved population from our data, then I wouldn't have included them as a category in that prioritization activity. So I guess the lesson for me is always that you go back to the data and what the data tells you, that's how you set up your prioritization. It's also very, I won't say it's easy to do because then I'm going to get people saying, you said it was easy, and it's like not that easy. It's not hard to set it up in Menti, but it takes a little bit of thought. It takes a little bit of sort of tweaking so that you do get like the outcome that you're looking for. You know what I mean? Like that you do get the prioritization right, because it depends a lot on how you word the questions as well. So it's a good question though. Thank you.
And I imagine there would be some like learning curve, like if you were an organization that was taking this on for the first time, that what it looks like iteration 1 might look a little different iteration 2.
Absolutely. We started very simply, and then we worked ourselves up to being able to prioritize 29 different actions. So I think that we themed those actions out, we themed them out, but it also enabled us to look at the bigger picture theme. So our EDI action plan is broken up into activities under our people, activities under our culture, and activities under our systems. So that's what prioritization enabled us to do, and look and group things that way. And that has really taken on. That's been taken on by the whole organization. So all of our action plans now are grouped into our people, our culture, and our system so that we're looking holistically across the entire organization.
And that kind of segues into this next question, which is how does your dashboard align with your prioritization framework? How do they work together for decision making?
I think it's a very good question. So I think what we try to do is refer back to the dashboard as the starting point for prioritization. So if we're missing a data set, let's say we don't have valid data, we don't have a good alignment rate in an area, then we know we need to work on that before we start a prioritization, because we're missing information and we never want to be missing people before we start to prioritize people. So for us, it's about always ensuring that our dashboard is current and that it's valid. And if there's work to do in that area, we do that first. So we prioritize doing that work of ensuring that our data that we are collecting is valid. And then when it comes to analyzing the data and assessing what the data tells us, that's the other piece where we have a very holistic view of that. I take a look at the dashboard every day, pretty much. I'm sure Sajin does too. And I know for a fact, like our data equity team, small team that we put together, we take a look at the dashboard every day to look at anomalies. But one of the other things that we've done recently is look at where our pressure points are on our dashboard. Where are there areas that we haven't been able to make movement on alignment? And what are the reasons for that? So we did take that to our leadership team meeting, and we talked about it with them and asked them to go back to their teams and staff and ask those questions and talk about it a little bit with them. Is there discomfort still there? Or is it just not a priority for them? And that's okay, but we need to know so that we know where the work needs to happen for us to improve alignment or improve confidence in staff and being able to build relationship with clients, but also then for us to be able to use that data responsibly. It needs to be valid so that we then can prioritize. So one of the areas that we've been able to prioritize as a result of being able to collect some of this data over time are veterans. And so we've been able to build a relationship with Veterans Affairs and build a program as a result of that. And also build some training for staff because that was an area of discomfort for people to talk about with clients. And so we built some training that Veterans Affairs provides. And then we also have a partnership with them now. And so that's from our data telling us that this was an impacted group that we are missing and that we don't have services specifically for or resources specifically for or even partnership that we can refer them to in a seamless way. So that's one way in which we're able to prioritize a group, invest resources and energy and time into figuring out what to do, and then do what we needed to do, take action. And now there's something in place for veterans across the organization.
That's great. I love it. I love the use of data to make those decisions and where you place those efforts. The one last question, two participants were wondering, Sajid, what the platform is that you're using to create your dashboards. Is it Tableau,
Oh,
Click?
yeah, good question. So we're using Power BI.
That's great. Yes. And we have a lot of folks that have had some curiosities about that. So you may end up with some emails coming through about that. As we start to kind of wind down the session, we're open still to hearing from you. Oh, EHR, what's your EHR tool that you're using? So Kimberly, thank you for your question.
We use CRMS.
Okay, that's great. Please continue to ask questions. We are going to launch our poll for your experience. We're wanting to hear from you about today's session specifically. And if you could just take a minute to give us answers to 4 questions on this webinar, we would love to have that. We make decisions using that data for the next in series or the next webinar that we provide. And we're really thankful that you could all stay and join after the long weekend. I wasn't sure how many folks would join. So happy to see a full house today. We will be sending out the slide deck and the link to the recording after today's session, but it'll be happening early next week. So keep an eye on your inbox for that email. And of course, that's where you will find the information on how to connect with our presenters, who are very thankful that they could be here with us today. And if you are at all curious about E-QIP, we do have a website that gives a full view of our service that we provide to the sector. It is free, and we would be happy to have you check it out there. You'll also find the entire webinar series is posted on our website as well. So if you've missed a session or you missed part 1 of this part of the series, you're welcome to go check it out there. We also offer governance and leadership training for organizations, so senior teams and to boards. If you're just wanting to kind of start building the foundation for a culture of quality at your organization, please reach out to us. There's direct links to contact our team here. And I wanted to bring forward the in considering that we are using Power BI, as a question that came up today, we have on our community of practice introduction to, I don't know why that keeps advancing on me, an introduction on how to implement and use Power BI. So for those of you who had a curiosity about Power BI or wanted to learn more about it, our community of practice is a way for you to engage. So March the 14th is coming up. And there are other sessions available as well throughout the rest of this year. There is a link to join there. And we have an extra session about collaborative quality improvement plans happening on March the 7th from 10 until 11. We will have presenters from Ontario Health, mental health and addiction service providers, and support teams presenting on that topic. It's a bonus offering that we have. So please do connect with us if you would like to join in on that session. We also have the opportunity for organizations who have a question around QI or data. They are welcome to join us through consultation. And on that previous slide, there is a link. I am not doing anything. These slides are advancing themselves. This is lovely. And then we have our foundations to QI, and now they've gone backwards. Foundations to QI Ideas e-course. I am now on the tip of my toes waiting what's going to happen next with these slides. And you can register for free and move through modules related to the quality improvement methods and tools. It's available in both English and in French. And again, it is free. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining. And Kimberly, I see that your question in the chat, we will absolutely, that link is live on the slides. So when you receive it, you can download that. If you want it sooner, I'm sure somebody from my team can post the link in the, oh, you've got to go. Okay, we will make sure you get it. Thanks a lot. And please feel free to reach out to E-QIP in general with any QI and data related topics. And again, thank you very much for attending today.